I once made a 72-hour round trip to Australia just to pick up a really rare record because I couldn't risk it getting damaged in the post.
Beastie.
Wow. What was the record? 100-metre sprint?
It was a rare Northern Soul record.
By?
Frank Wilson.
And what was the record called?
It was called Do I Love You, Indeed I Do. It was originally printed and all 500 presses were smashed because Motown didn't like it. But 2 survived, well, 2 knowingly survived. We thought we'd find a 3rd one.
Is it a single or an album?
It's a 7-inch.
Sorry, but flying all that way for a 7-inch doesn't seem like a very good use of time or money. Yeah.
The one that we know of, that I know of, sold for £28,000, so it's quite...
And how much were you paying for it?
Well, we thought we could get it for about 9 grand.
Where did you get it from? Was it from eBay or something?
No, it was just from some research, and someone phoned up and said he thinks he's got a copy of it in Melbourne, Australia.
OK.
So I went over on Qantas.
So when you got there, did the 3rd one exist?
It did exist, yeah, but it was in such a bad state. It was like someone had glued it back together.
So you couldn't play it?
No, you couldn't play it, no.
Craig, could you do a bit of the song?
Do I love you? Do I love you? Do I...
Oh, it was scratched, wasn't it? Presume you'd have been expected, if you'd have brought it back, expected to pay import duty?
I wasn't expecting that.
You might not have been expecting it, but I suspect they were.
Jeremy, what do you think?
It just seems so impractical to fly that distance and pay that amount of money to buy something. So I'm edging towards lie here.
Did you offer him anything?
I did offer him £5,000.
And he said no?
And I brought it home.
Oh!
Oh, you did buy it?
So you've got it now, have you?
Yeah.
This now sounds true.
I think it's true.
Yeah, well, I think he's well known for his love of music, so he might be mad enough to do that. We'll say it's true.
Saying it's true. They think it's true, Craig. Was it true, or were you telling us a lie?
I was telling you a lie.